States many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We are going to dive into the Oregon standoff and all the breaking news that many of you probably followed throughout the day, and it started late last night, early this morning. We will be diving into that. We're also going to be diving into some of the politics with Donald Trump deciding not to be a part of the next GOP debate because of Megyn Kelly, while Rand Paul is back in the main debate. We'll be diving into that. I do want to kind of dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report, talking about the Federal Reserve, and they were meeting today to see what their next step is in saving the economy. And we know that they had recently just raised interest rates, which didn't really make the markets too happy, did it? Markets weren't happy in the first place, and they raised the interest rates, trying to convince people that the economy is so much better. And what I see coming down the road isn't our quantitative easing. But we'll go ahead and dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. Fed in a box, no tools left.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me this morning is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Later today, there'll be a major release of an exciting event because the Fed's going to finish their meeting and tell us what they're going to do to save the economy. And there's a lot of fanfare going on. What do you think is going to happen? Are you saying, well, maybe they're going to solve the problem? Everything is going to be okay?
The word everyone's using is dove. They're going to be dovish.
Dovish, yeah, that's what they're saying. The odds of that happening, of course, is slim to none because of even the title of our program, the Fed is in a box. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people refer to where the Fed is there between the rock and a hard place, that they have no place else to go. And some argue that, well, they've been around for a long time and they seem to get out of trouble, the free markets are always giving us these recessions and causing problems, and the Fed always comes to the rescue. That's sort of the belief that goes on. They said, and they still are bragging how they rescued the economy in 08 and 09 from a total disaster. And yet I saw just recently that total debt now in the economy is 40% higher than it was in 08. Wow. And, the unemployment statistics haven't improved. It's really still a major mess, but the Fed rarely gets blamed, but more so than ever before. And that's what I think is good, because we want to get the people, educated. But I want to talk about the Fed, the philosophy of the Fed and the philosophy of money. But the biggest contention I have, even though economically it's terrible, constitutionally it's terrible, but one result from this is the growth of government. The people would never be willing to give up so much of their savings for the government to spend all this money. And here this gimmick is, well, we're going to create new money out of thin air and we're going to get away with it forever. And of course, we have the welfare and domestic spending. Everybody gets something for free. It's their stuff. They never ask, where does it come from? It comes from the government, and the Fed is part of the government. They never say that it ultimately is a cost to the middle class. But it's also, when you think in the case of foreign policy, it seems like they are participating in this fraud as well.
Well, as you pointed out many times, the empire, as we call it, would be impossible without the Fed. Just look at one thing. I've got a couple of other things if we have time later, but just look at one thing. In 2013, President Obama announced a $1 trillion 30-year program to modernize our nuclear triad, all of our nuclear weapons. $1 trillion over 30 years. If you divide that by the number of Americans, that's about $3,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. But if you look at the statistics, I forget what the exact percentage is, but there's a very large, significant percentage of American homes that if they were hit with a surprise $500 bill for something, they simply wouldn't have the money in their savings. They don't have the money. So how is every man, woman, and child going to come up with $3,000 from newer nuclear missiles?
You mentioned the triad. I think there was one of the candidates that sort of messed up and didn't understand what the triad was. But the triad is really pretty much of a old story. It's a farce because they're talking about manned bombers. In this age of missiles and submarines and everything else, and they're talking the triad. We have to have these airplanes. We have to keep this going. You talk about malinvestment. I mean, this is really bad, and yet there's still a lot of conservatives. You've heard the arguments. Well, the military spending is good for jobs, and then what do they do then? Where do these jobs go? Does it go to one state, or could it be that it's a political decision?
Well, there are a lot of very good jobs around Washington, the Beltway, that come from the military-industrial complex. But the poor guy in the middle of the country who's having to suffer through inflation to pay for it is not feeling that good.
Yeah, and people say, well, it's still good. They're getting money, and there's jobs, and Paul Krugman would argue anything is helpful if they're getting paid for something. And the silly story is if you pay somebody to dig a hole and pay somebody to fill it up, it's still a job and it's good for the economy. But nobody looks at the Bastiat instead of what, and Hazlitt was so good on this. If we spend this $1 trillion and you think seriously through this, you realize that we don't need it. We're not stronger. And it's a cliche today. If you want to be strong for defense and you're going to take care of ISIS, you have to rebuild the military. But they never consider that expenditure is malinvestment. Yes, there'll be a submarine built, or there'll be airplanes built, or more. They want to redo the nuclear system. How many nukes do we need? So they want to do this, but they never ask the question: where would that have gone?
Yeah.
What would have happened if it would stayed in the economy, in the free market here? Maybe there would be competition in healthcare or competition in education. Maybe there would be much better education for more people at a much lower price. But the seductiveness comes from the Fed, because it isn't like, well, we're not going to appropriate $1 trillion, and that $1 trillion are going to come back immediately, and the people get to spend it. Because what they do is they pump it into debt, and this is the culprit that the Fed allows to happen, is they prop up the debt system, and they figure they can do it forever. When you issue the reserve currency like we do, you get away with it for a long time. So the more fragile the system becomes, the more the reserve currency benefits. But I think there are cracks in that, and I think that's coming to an end.
Yeah, and look at there are certainly a lot of people that look at how countries that are considering stopping using the dollar as a reserve currency end up on the enemies list of the U.S.
Right. Like you mentioned, people wouldn't want to pay their fair share to pay for this military stuff, and they get away with this. But what about the welfare mentality? It's all based on a humanitarian instinct. You want to help people who aren't able to take care of themselves. But just think of how many people now don't have good health care, and that the cost is going up. Just think of all the gimmickry going on, that if you have insurance and do what exactly the government says and pay the insurance companies, the medication might be $3. But if you say, I'm going to go it on my own, I'm going to pay my own way, that $3 medication might cost you $250, or sometimes it's into the thousands of dollars if it's important drugs. It sets up monopolies. I think this whole system, whether it was the drug bill that Bush passed, as well as Obamacare, was designed to help corporations, just as the military-industrial complex is. It helps the corporations, helps the banks. In this, all this domestic intervention is to help corporations. The medical system is corporations now. And then you have the insurance companies and the drug companies, and still people have a tough time getting health care. And the people who are punished the most are the most responsible, who want to pay their own way. Reminds me of this system that the Fed created. That if an individual, and I remember when these days were, where people felt responsible for taking care of themselves in old age, and they weren't really sophisticated and buying stocks and bonds, but they would save money, and they would get paid 2%, 3%, and they were frugal, and they lived within their own means. But today, they punish those people. They now are talking about taxing people who put their money in savings, and they want the elderly just to spend the money. But that's all comes out of this mentality that a central bank is able to plan the economy. And I think that's where the biggest fallacy is they believe in taxation through dilution of the value of the money. They believe in inflation, of course, just print the money as you need it. They believe that we have to expand debt. And that's one reason why they like the idea of fractional reserve banking, because this allows the banks to expand the money supply, not just the Federal Reserve.
And I think people instinctively understand that something is very seriously wrong with the economy. Unfortunately, not enough of them have listened to you over the years and understood really what the cause is. But I do think people have a sense that something is really wrong, and that's why you see the attraction, I think, of someone like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, who are each promising something that appeals to people who haven't spent the time, like a doctor would, looking at what's causing the disease rather than the symptoms.
And I've always maintained that the problem is apparent. The solution, really, if they hear it, is not all that complicated. Because if you go to the average 10-year-old and talk to them about monopoly money or paper money, that, if you just go out and write things on a piece of paper, do you think you can go to a store and buy them?
I tried that once when I was a kid. It didn't get far.
You were learning your lessons about how the Fed worked. But, the solution there is define the value of money. That you can't be arbitrary. And defining the value of money, like our original government did, only gold and silver, and they actually, the first Monetary Act was in 1792. They defined the dollar as a weight of silver, and that was precise. It shouldn't be confused with fixing the value of the money on the purchasing power, because you want things to fluctuate. You want prices to go up and down and the value of the money to go up and down. But what you don't want is no definition. And right now, there is no definition. As the dollar is defined as a Federal Reserve note, as something they owe. So if you have a dollar and you take it to the government and say, well, this is a note, what are you going to pay me? It used to be they'd give us gold. And in my lifetime, we could go and we'd get silver dollars. When I first started collecting coins as a kid, I would pick out the silver dollars and go to the bank and buy silver. Even remembering not too long ago that even copper, became, now copper is more valuable than a penny. And I would save copper pennies. Not that copper is a real hedge against it, but things were of real value. But the definition was so important. But it was absent of fixing prices. You didn't fix the price of money. This is probably the number one economic error of the central bank, is they think they know how to manage the entire economy by fixing interest rates, which is something that they have no idea what the proper fixing of the interest rates should be. But why is this so important? We've lived through wage and price controls and fixing the prices on different things. Education and medical care is sort of being fixed by government. But when you fix the price or value of money through interest rates, what you're doing is you're regulating the entire economy. One half of the economy is always the value of the currency. Most people can understand supply and demand of cell phones and different things. The more they build and the technology, they go up and down as long as there's a market competition. But rarely do people think there's a supply and demand of money. And that is also a factor. But they have this control. It's done once again in secrecy, and there are some people who really benefit from this, and it's usually the people who wheel and deal and provide products like in the mortgage market that led up to the crisis of '08. And then the very people benefiting from this evil, wicked system are the ones who are in control, and they get the bailouts. So the innocent people that I was talking about, the ones who are trying to save, they end up getting punishment because they end up with a higher cost of living. And the worst thing in the world to do would be to tax them for putting money in the bank, and other countries are doing that. And then the other thing that we're on the verge of doing, to people wanting, the central bankers want to counteract, is they're still saying, you're not spending enough money, so we're going to penalize you, but we don't want you to have a run on the bank. We don't want you to say, hey, I'm getting worried about this. Banks are closing. I'm going to go, and somebody says, well, the last of my savings, I want it in a shoebox. I want Federal Reserve notes. And that's why they're going toward this cashless society, because that would be the last vote of the consumer to go and protect themselves. And even though it's lousy protection to buy Federal Reserve notes, which are shrinking in value. But in the old days, and why Roosevelt, what was the first thing he did was he confiscated gold, because gold was a hedge against government overreach and spending and all the things that were going on. But right now, there's not going to be many things that the people can rely on, but they need to really understand this system that the foreign policy and expenditures there depend on it. The welfare system depends on it. These artificial interest rates causes, the malinvestment, causes the debt. And then, once again, not only does it cause all these problems, but they always try to cover up. They will talk about, saying debt doesn't matter, and then they'll have the regulations. Right now, the biggest regulator is the Federal Reserve. They make all these mistakes. Instead of eliminating mistakes, they say, we will regulate and just pile on. That's what Dodd-Frank was all about. Then they'll come along and they'll say, well, yeah, we understand this is risky business. Fractional reserve banking, where banks create money out of thin air. We'll have insurance. We'll have government insurance. We'll say that all your deposits are protected, and the big guys get protected too. Because you're too big to fail, the government will bail you out. So they have the insurance, and they get the bailout, so they cover it up. But what we're witnessing today is the end stage of this, and that's why the Fed is in a box. They're truly between the rock and a hard place. They don't have a solution, because regardless of what they say today, they may be able to move markets right before the announcement. They may be able to move markets afterwards. But long term, they're on a dead-end course. And this can't work, and it's going to end. It's going to end badly. But the good news is that the information and understanding of monetary policy in the Austrian School of Economics is better understood than ever before. And it involves sound money. It involves truly voluntary contracts. It includes property rights. And you put that together, and it's a wonderful answer. And it causes a much greater chance of having prosperity as well as peace in the world. So I cannot see why people would even be tempted to reject these principles. And today, as we look and wait and see what the Fed's going to say, and finally end up finding they're not saying anything, we just have to further protect ourselves. But ultimately, the only thing, we can talk about economic policy and sound money and the Constitution, but ultimately, the only saving grace will be to be able to live in a free society where the government is designed to protect our liberties and not have a one where they are representing the various special interest groups who band together and destroy the middle class. And that is what's happening. We have this majoritarian approach that as long as we get 51% to agree, we can do anything we want to the people who produce in the world. And that is why, you hear some of the candidates saying, tax? We need to tax more and more. Well, we need to wake up and say, we're finished with that. We're sick and tired of being taxed. We're sick and tired of the inflation. And what we need to do is just have a whole generation of people willing to challenge the monetary system and the economic system that we have today. That is the only thing that will answer to the problems that we have. And we have a good background, we have an understanding, but it's better understood today than it ever has in the history of the world, because freedom advances slowly, ups and downs, back and forth. But today there's a much better understanding of monetary policy and economics than it even was when the founders put the Constitution together. So we are advancing in that sort. But believe me, Washington has a lot of catching up to do. I don't see them catching up until the whole thing comes down and we have enough people to rebuild it with these sound economic theories and defending the principles of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, one of the statistics that he pointed out there was the national debt per household. Says here, 8,314,529,850,339.07. Debt up to $70,612.91 per household in Obama's first 7 years. According to official data published by the U.S. Treasury, that equals 70,612.91 in net federal borrowing for each of the 117,480,000 households that the Census Bureau estimates were in the United States as of September. During President George W. Bush 8 years in office, the federal debt increased by $4,899,100,310,608.44. According to the Treasury, that equaled $44,104.65 in net federal borrowing for each of the 111,079,000 households that, according to the Census Bureau, were in the country as of January 2009, the day that Bush left office and Obama assumed it. And that was originally out of CNS News. Read the full article there. Now, I have one here about the Fed. Fed holds rates steady amid market turmoil. All three major U.S. index turned negative in the first moments after the statement's release. The Federal Reserve held interest rates steady on Wednesday amid growing concern about the global economy. The central bank, which is led by Chairwoman Janet Yellen, announced at the close of its latest policy meeting that it was keeping interest rates between 0.25 and 0.5%. In addition, the Fed said it would be closely monitoring global economic and financial developments. The Fed decided to raise rates for the first time in nearly a decade at its December meeting. Since then, financial markets have been in upheaval, driven by a rapid decline in oil prices and growing concern about the strength of China's economy. In its newest statement, the Fed said that while the labor market had improved, economic growth had slowed. And you can read the rest of that article at The Hill. We already knew this was going to happen. They kept interest rates artificially low, and all that did was create a bubble. We've been warning you about the interest rate bubble. Now there's a double-edged sword, but some of this is coming on by the low oil prices, which again, when you have OPEC pumping oil out of the ground easily, you'll hear all these mainstream media talk about, fracking is why oil prices are so low. No, it's not. Fracking takes a lot more energy and really research to find out where to frack. What we have here is you have foreign markets dumping extremely cheap oil, which they can afford to do because it takes almost nothing for them to pull it out of the ground. They are pumping this oil into the market, which will eventually hurt us when we haven't had the money to invest in the research and more discovery for fracking or any of that, and then they jack prices back up. Now, there's a lot of concern out there about the fracking. Fracking's been going on for a long time, but some of the techniques are definitely in question, and there are a lot of things that we could do to get oil out of the ground safely. We do have some of the green movement that, pulling oil out of the ground at all is bad. Just, no refining oil. And I don't agree with that. Now, I do question when they're fracking and techniques that they use and true safety precautions being taking place. But, there's a lot of question out there about some of the fracking techniques that they're using, and they're probably trying to do it to lower costs to compete in this market, which will backfire, I believe. But, all that speculation until you have all the proof. There's other broadcasts on this network that have covered a lot of the fracking. And it's really, you are hearing both sides of the issue, and you're finding slowly but surely the truth that lays somewhere in the middle. But I believe this bubble is popping, and the oil bubble can eventually pop here soon, and I think that's something that we need to really, really pay attention to. Okay, give me a second here. I had one, Dr. Mark Thornton on central bankers don't understand, and it kind of covers a little bit of what Dr. Paul was talking about, but it kind of also gets a little bit more in depth. Again, Dr. Mark Thornton, this out of Mises Media.
Our guest this weekend is our own Dr. Mark Thornton, a senior fellow here at the Mises Institute, and our topic is booms and busts. Falling stock prices are in the news lately, so Mark and I will talk about how and why central bankers don't understand deflation, whether they're really Keynesians or some variant thereof, what a crack-up boom might look like, i.e. deflationary rather than hyperinflationary, and what the skyscraper index and other forms of irrational spending might tell us about the future of the global economy. Stay tuned for Dr. Mark Thornton. Dr. Mark Thornton, Happy New Year to you, and welcome back to Mises Weekends.
It's great to be here.
Mark, I'd like to begin by quoting from an article in today's Wall Street Journal. It is Friday, January 22nd. The title of this article is almost surreal to me. It says, "Inflation Lows Vex Central Bankers." And the article talks about how the central banks need to respond to persistently low inflation tied to slow growth and falling commodities prices. Last time I checked, most of us like paying less for gasoline. But anyway, they quote Mario Draghi as saying, "We don't give up. We are not surrendering in front of these global factors." And they also quote from the Bank of Japan, Governor Kuroda, saying, "The credibility of Bank of Japan policy will likely take a hit if the central bank doesn't act." I mean, it's almost surreal, isn't it, hearing these central bankers talk about how they need to prop up inflation. Give us your thoughts on it.
Well, it seems like we're living in 1984, and everything is upside down, everything is backwards. It's a world where inflation is a good thing, and deflation, or falling prices, is a bad thing. And it is a crazy, insane world that we're looking at out there, whether it's Japan or Europe or the United States. All the major economies of the world are in trouble, and it's caused by central banks, and they don't have a clue as to what they should be doing.
Well, you mentioned deflation. Let's talk about that. Deflation seems to be the constant boogeyman of central bankers. From an Austrian perspective, what is deflation, and how should we think about it?
Well, we think about it as a falling money supply, but of course everybody else talks about deflation as falling prices. All of mainstream economics and central bankers fear deflation. They have a phobia about deflation or falling prices. And actually, of course, most of the people in the world, they love deflation. They love paying less for gasoline, for example. They love paying less at the grocery store. And so Austrians and everybody in the world view deflation as a good thing, and central bankers and mainstream economists view it as the most awful thing possible in the world.
Well, and when we're talking about deflation, we also mean deflation of stock market prices, right? When you talk about booms and busts in your own work and in writing, central bankers fear busts more than anything, whereas Austrians will view busts as painful but necessary corrections. What is the central banker mentality about booms and busts? Since they don't accept Austrian business cycle theory, how do they view booms and busts?
Well, they don't like deflation because they associate it with the Great Depression. They don't like it because of big government debt that is harder to pay off. And so there are some tangible reasons that they see. They don't want to see falling stock prices because that hurts psychology in the economy. But Austrians have a view of deflation as it's a necessary process to correct the malinvestments that are caused by central banks' artificially low interest rate policy. So yes, in a correction, stock market prices fall a tremendous amount. The price of land falls by a tremendous amount. The price of warehousing space and retail space, all those leasing rates has to fall dramatically. But you know, the price of milk and the price of toothpaste and the price of paper goods, those are all relatively stable. And so as capital prices, land prices, and wage rates decline, while consumer goods don't decline very much, that creates an atmosphere where entrepreneurs out there see profit opportunities in producing existing goods as well as producing brand new goods. And so the correction and the crash phase in the business cycle gives entrepreneurs this great environment to put resources back together, to hire workers, to buy land, to buy office space and all that, and produce more goods because they see tremendous profit opportunities. And so during the correction phase, this is when we see a lot of new firms put together, small dynamic companies that are producing brand new goods. And so if you go back and you look at the formation of all the great companies, you'll see that a lot of those new ideas took place during previous crashes and corrections.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about prices falling across asset class in a depression. This is one of the big myths of investment advice, right? That if you diversify, you'll protect yourself. What we saw, certainly with the crash of 2008, is stocks, bonds, real estate, all kinds of investments all came down at once. So diversification doesn't really protect you from central banking.
No, it doesn't. And Irving Fisher thought that back in the 1920s, that if you diversified your investments, that you would somehow be protected. But of course, mutual funds that are widely diversified lost just as much money as the overall marketplace. But this view of deflation really gets at the idea of, this error of central bankers and mainstream economists' fixation on consumer price index measures and GDP measures. When Austrians look at it, we're looking at, capital prices, wage rates, consumer goods. We're breaking those prices down into their separate categories, and you get more information. You understand how the economy works and how jobs are actually created. They don't have any idea of how jobs are actually created, how new companies form, and how businesses grow, because they don't understand the workings of the economy, because they're fixated on the consumer price index and GDP.
Now, earlier you mentioned that one reason central bankers hate falling stock market prices is because of the psychology behind it. Let's talk about that. I know Mises talked a lot about the psychology of entrepreneurs and the psychology of the economy and praxeology, so economics being a subset of greater human action. We've heard politicians say, well, let's be careful not to talk ourselves into a recession. Talk about the role that psychology plays in the boom-bust cycle.
Yeah, you would be amazed at how much economists are fixated on psychology in the marketplace. They really view psychology, and this goes back to John Maynard Keynes and before. They think that psychology is moving the marketplace in terms of jobs and GDP and stock markets and that sort of thing. But that's not really the case. There's got to be real factors that make for this psychology. And Austrians look at central banks artificially reducing interest rates, leading to a boom in the economy where everybody's making money, where all investments seem to be profitable. And of course, the psychology gets very, very positive during that phase. And so there is psychological changes, but it's caused by the instability of central bank policy. It's not caused by mass hysteria. And so as the bust phase comes about and, businesses are losing money, people are losing their jobs, homes are being foreclosed on, naturally, this leads to a depressed psychology out there in the marketplace. But it's caused by real factors, and it's caused ultimately by the instability of central bank policy. And so the central banks are trying to fight this psychology when actually they are the ones that are causing those psychological mass phenomenon.
Well, when we use this term Keynesian to describe central bankers, do you think we use it too loosely? In other words, Keynes himself evolved throughout his writings, and we often accuse mainstream economists of criticizing Austrian works without having really read them very thoroughly or understanding them very deeply. Are we guilty of the same thing as Austrians, of throwing the term Keynesian around too loosely, do you think?
Probably to a certain extent. There's a lot of diversity of opinion in mainstream economics. There's, of course, the neoclassical synthesis, and then there are probably 7, 8, 9 other heterodox versions of economics. But I would say this, that when push comes to shove, they all seem to react to, for example, the economic crisis in pretty much the same way. They see the economy going into a crisis. They see this change in psychology, And so they resort right back to Keynesian stimulus policies. And of course, they have a diversity of opinion there, but ultimately it means increasing the money supply, reducing interest rates, deficit spending, public works projects. And so, yes, there is a diversity of opinion within mainstream economics, but ultimately they all resort back to the same general ideas, whether it's Ben Bernanke, whether it's Paul Krugman. They just have, different recipes, but they're all cooking the same game, basically.
But to some extent, across this range within mainstream economists, they're all encouraged by the same idea that Keynes did have, was that the policy of governments and central banks should ever and always be to create demand-side stimulus. Is that maybe a catch-all way of looking at Keynesianism?
I would think so, yeah. That's what the aggregate demand, aggregate supply story is all about, is that when there's a faltering in terms of the quantity of production that's going on in the economy, in terms of GDP, then you have to come up with some way to stimulate the demand side in the economy, to keep GDP growing, to prevent the unemployment rate from rising. They're pretty much, of course, there's supply siders as well. They're kind of on the fringe of the economics profession, and they see correctly that tax cuts can stimulate aggregate production in the economy.
So, Mark, in his book, The Theory of Money and Credit, which is now more than 100 years old, Mises talked about the limits of monetary policy. He wrote about what he called a crack-up boom, where at some point, no amount of stimulus created by a central bank can stave off what he described as a potentially hyperinflationary scenario. Now, I've heard critics of the Austrian school say, no, a deep recession or a depression is actually deflationary because debt is shed, either through bankruptcy or insolvency or marking it to market. And as debt contracts, obviously the money supply contracts. So really Mises was wrong, and that a deep depression is deflationary. So help us better understand what Mises meant by a crack-up boom. Is it necessarily a hyperinflationary event, or as critics say, is a crack-up really a deflationary event?
Well, it can go either way. I mean, generally speaking, central bankers and public policymakers have pulled back. They've said, okay, this isn't working. We're going to have to raise interest rates to quell inflation. And so, generally speaking, they pull back from the edge, and the economy goes into that correction phase. But there is the outer limit where you can get an inflation that they keep feeding, basically, and that inflation does, eventually, is at very high rates, it extinguishes long-term contracts like bonds. They become relatively worthless, and then it's just a matter of they keep feeding money into the economy, and prices start rising. And at some point, people realize that the money that they're getting is losing its value, and so they decrease their demand for money, and the economy would spin into a hyperinflation. That has happened in numerous cases. Zimbabwe is the latest case, but it's not the only case, and it's not just third world countries that have experienced these type of hyperinflation. So it remains a possibility at the outer limit, as Mises described.
Mark, one last question for you. You talk and write a lot about the skyscraper index. Nobody can know or perfectly time a boom or a bust phase exactly. But what are some of the indices you look for? You talk about skyscrapers. We can see anecdotal things in the media like Silicon Valley firms that don't make any profit, but they're so full of venture capital that they have these fabulous Christmas parties in Las Vegas. These are the kinds of anecdotal things we see that feel a lot like 2008 to us. So tell us about some of the things you look for in predicting a bust.
Well, the skyscraper index is when you have a record-setting skyscraper telling us that it's going to be an economic crisis in the world. And China just set a record last year, and of course it's experienced a lot of negative pain in its markets. It's not doing very well at all. And there is a world record-setting skyscraper being built in Saudi Arabia, scheduled to be completed, I guess, later this year, next year. And of course, Saudi Arabia is in an economic mess as well. But you also look for the irrational exuberance, the intensive luxury spending, people doing just crazy, zany, luxurious spending. Of course, you can see some of that out in Silicon Valley with Apple and Facebook and Salesforce and all these companies building record-setting skyscrapers in California and just uber luxurious corporate headquarters in all those social media high-tech companies. And so it doesn't have to be a world record height in terms of skyscrapers, but it can also be any kind of lavish, over-the-top spending out there in the economy.
Well, it's starting to feel like 2008, and let's hope it's not feeling like 1929. Dr. Mark Thornton, thanks so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great weekend.
Mises.org, however you pronounce it. Mises Media on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. I have one article I'm going to cover about Apple before we get on with some more news. Apple isn't as rich as you think it is. Apple bulls love to talk about the company's massive pile of cash. But all that dough doesn't belong to investors. The gadget maker reported holding cash and investments of $215.7 billion as of the end of the December quarter. On its face, that looks impressive. Apple has $38.9 share in cash and investments, which is more than any other non-financial company in the Standard & Poor's 500. Apple cash and investments is 21% higher than it was a year ago. There's just one problem. Apple's cash isn't free and clear for investors to cash in on. Apple has been piling on debt over the years, even faster than cash is growing. Apple ended last year with $53.2 billion in long-term debt, which is up 64% from the same period a year ago. The debt amounts to $9.60 a share. Apple's debt is taking a bigger bite out of cash and investments. Here's another rub. Apple's cash is in the U.S. 93% and held in the U.S. 93% is held overseas, says Standard & Poor's rating service. Much of that cash would face U.S. tax rates if returned to the U.S., which is a big reason why Apple is borrowing money. By borrowing dollars in the U.S., the company can afford to pay its 2.1% dividend yield and keep buying back its own stock without getting Uncle Sam involved. Seeing billions out of their grasp is becoming a common issue for Apple investors. Shares of Apple are down another $4.58 or 4.6% to $95.44 Wednesday. That means the stock has shredded $214 billion in shareholder value since hitting their peak last year. Shares of Apple are falling as investors finally recognize the smartphone market has matured to such a degree the company is warning revenue in the current quarter could fall as much as 14%. All this isn't to belittle the enormity of Apple's cash. When it comes to non-financial companies, only Microsoft comes even remotely close to Apple in terms of cash and investments. At $111 billion, Apple too generated an impressive $64.4 billion in free cash flow in the past 12 months, which is more than what Facebook is expected to report in revenue for all of 2015 after the market closes Wednesday, says S&P Capital IQ. And again, that was out of USA Today. Apple isn't as rich as you think, and we're just going to see the stock market fall to correction territory. They might not call it correction territory, but when you have a bubble created, yeah, you're going to see your retirement funds dry up. But at the same time, again, double-edged sword. Oil prices are low. Your money right now will go farther. Prices aren't going to be able to go up unless, again, they play that manipulation in the market, which is only creating a bubble that will, again, pop. So we have to look at that. Okay, we are going to move along here. Okay. Sorry. We're going to go straight to Truth in Media. The first article, 1 dead, 5 in custody after shots fired during confrontation. And this was with the Bundy and some militia members as federal agents performed a traffic stop, which seems to be becoming more and more like a ambush, or having roadblocks set up and all that. I do have a audio clip I will play here, but I'm not going to cover that first article because most of you already know much of what's going on. But the second article out of Truth in Media, Bundy family claims protester was unarmed, had hands up when killed by FBI. And this is not all they're claiming, that they were shot at before all of this happened. A spokesperson for the Bundy family said there has to be retribution after he claimed Robert Lavoy Finicum was unarmed and had his hands up when he was shot and killed by the FBI during a traffic stop. Now, I want to also add that I've seen a few reports that claim FBI claims that he was armed, but I do not have the official report, so that is not confirmed by me. But it says here, again, truthinmedia.com, the Bundy family claimed Arizona rancher Robert Lavoy Finnegan was unarmed and had his hands up when he was shot and killed by FBI agents during a confrontation Tuesday near Burns, Oregon. Finnegan, 55, was part of the group of protesters occupying the Mahler Wildlife Refuge headquarters in Burns. At least 8 others, including protest leaders Almond and Ryan Bundy, were arrested after FBI and Oregon State Police confronted them while they were traveling along US 395. Cliven Bundy posted an audio message on the Bundy Ranch Facebook page Tuesday night claiming that his son Almond told 2 family members that he was arrested, his brother Ryan was shot in the arm, and Finicum was murdered in cold blood. Lavoy has been cold blood murdered. Almond Buddy reportedly told his wife Lisa he had his hands in the air and said he was unarmed and they shot him. Bundy's nephew Steve Bundy also told the Las Vegas Sun that Finnegan was cold blood murdered, and he said there would be retribution. There has to be retribution, Steve Bundy said, but they're not going to ruin the element of surprise. But we are not going to ruin the element of surprise. Arena Finicum Brown, 26. One of Lavoy Finnegan's 11 children told the Oregonian that her father was a good man through and through and said he would never ever want to hurt somebody, but he does believe in defending freedom and he knew the risks involved. Finnegan was a spokesperson for and a member of the group of protesters that has been occupying the Mueller Wildlife Refuge headquarters for the last month in support of two ranchers who were forced to serve mandatory minimum sentences after they were convicted of arson on federal lands. 5 of the protesters were arrested on felony charges of conspiracy to impede federal officers Tuesday after FBI agents stopped a vehicle traveling on Highway 395 from Burns to John Day. The protesters included Almond Bundy, 40, Ryan Bundy, 43, Brian Cavalier, 44, Shauna Cox, 59, and Ryan Payne, 32. Joseph Donald O'Shaughnessy, 45, and Peter Santilli, 50, were also reportedly taken into FBI custody separately in Burns, along with John Eric Ritzheimer, 32, in Arizona. Following the confrontation, the FBI has not released details as to why the men were stopped or why a shooting broke out, but has set up checkpoints around the wildlife refuge. One of the remaining protesters at the refuge headquarters, Jason Patrick, told Reuters that the protesters would continue to occupy the refuge until there was a redress of grievances. I've heard peaceful resolution for weeks now, and now there's a cowboy who is my friend who is dead, Patrick said, so prepare for the peaceful resolution. Patrick also compared Finnegan's death to the death of Tamir Rice, an unarmed 12-year-old who was shot by Cleveland police in 2014. The officers responsible were not charged. The government can kill who they want for whatever reason they want with impunity, Patrick said. So this is starting to really get out of hand. It really is. Now, let me try to find this audio clip. And this audio clip, there are also other reports out, eyewitness. This out of InfoWars, eyewitness Oregon militiaman murdered by cops. He had his hands in the air. Daughter, he was shot in the face. The daughter of LaVoy Finnegan, the Oregon militiaman shot dead by police during a traffic stop on Highway 395 yesterday, claims that her father was murdered execution style with his hands in the air, an account backed up by an eyewitness to the incident. Protesters involved in the weeks-long occupation of federal wildlife refuge in Oregon, including leader Almond Bundy, were apprehended by law enforcement as they traveled to the city of John Day to attend a community meeting set up by local residents. Everyone obeyed orders to surrender except 2 people, LaVoy Finnegan and Bundy's brother Ryan Bundy, a law enforcement official told CNN. Media reports about the incident simply state that shots were fired, although Finnegan's daughter, Thera Lynn Tenney, posted a message on her Facebook page last night asserting that her father had already surrendered before he was gunned down. I want the world to know how my father was murdered today. His hands were in the air and he was shot in the face by the American authorities. Almond Bundy reported there were 6 witnesses to this evil, wrote Tenney. Her testimony echoed by another eyewitness, Victoria Sharp, who was in the car with Finnegan when the group were pulled over by cops and federal agents. Sharp claims that Finnegan put his hands out of the car window and asked the police to allow the women to leave the car. They shot at him, but they missed him, said Sharp, adding that the group then attempted to drive away in the car, but they were shot at again by police. When we crashed and stopped for a second, he got out of the car. He had his hands in the air. He's like, just shoot me then. And they did. They shot him dead, said Sharp. He was just walking with his hands in the air, I swear to God, and they shot him dead. And after he was down on the ground, they shot him 3 more times, said Sharp, adding that the vehicle was again bombarded with bullets as well as tear gas rounds. Sharp says the group tried to find something white so they could display it as a sign of surrender. She challenges news reports that only 6 shots were fired, asserting that at least 120 shots altogether. Sharp also claims that none of the individuals in the car pulled out a gun at any point, and the incident was an ambush with FBI snipers in the trees surrounding the vehicle. They had their hands out of the window to show they were not firing nothing. We showed no aggression at all, said Sharp. Sharp's testimony is contradicted by another individual who said he spoke to Almond Bundy's security guard and that Lavoy Finnegan had charged at police officers after he exited the vehicle. Protesters who remain at the occupied federal building have vowed to continue their stance as authorities continue to insist they want peaceful resolution to the matter. And I'm going to play this clip here. And this one is Victoria Sharp and her account of what happened. Now, again, I've said this before that, you know, I might agree with the message and the need to stop federal land grab, but I did not see this protest ever going anywhere other than this direction. One, because it started out with the Hammonds. They didn't want the help. The locals, even though there were a lot that supported the message, they still wanted the occupation end. So you didn't have the locals. Your outsiders being asked by locals to stop the occupation. That emboldens the federal agencies to go ahead and act because you are not being supported. Why are you not being supported? Well, because the people that you came to support told you they didn't need it, that they were turning themselves in. So, you know, and when you show up with guns, I understand, you know, the civil disobedience and all that, but I think if you showed up without guns and they try to harm you, I think that there would be a little bit more sympathy. Not saying that just because you guys own weapons or brought weapons and have been, you know, nonviolent in a peaceful protest, that it plays more into the media, what they want to portray you as. So there again, you know, you are going to be portrayed a certain way. But I wasn't a supporter of this. I just, you know, if you're protecting your land or you're protecting someone else's land and they want you there is one thing, but when you're not wanted, you're not really protesting much anymore. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this audio clip here.
Ella had like a laser on us. They're like, turn out the car and put your head out the window and all this stuff. He's like, he put his hands out the window so they could see he didn't have a gun. He's like, but I'm not. He's like, I'm not. He's like, we're going to talk to the sheriff right now. He's like, you guys can follow us there, that's fine. He's like, but we're talking to the sheriff. He said, either you can put a bullet through my head right now and get it over with, or we're going to talk to the sheriff. And they were like, no. And so then they're like stepping it up, and a bunch more guys are coming out, and they're all pulling their guns out. And they were like, we have women in the car. We have, because there's me and this other lady in the car that I don't know real well. But we have women in the car. They said, get the women out of the car. Get the women out of the car. And they're saying they're to shoot. And Ryan Payne was like, he was in the front seat. Ryan Payne is amazing. He is incredible. But anyhow, so he was like, he said he put his hands out the window because he was trying to talk to them. He's like, if he wanted the guy to just, he was like, I don't know if it's worth it. He's like, so he put his hands out the window and he said, we have women in the car, at least let the women get out. And he stuck his head out and they shot at him, but they missed him, or like he ducked just in time. So they didn't hit him. And then they're like, oh, they mean business. They're going to shoot us. And so Ryan decided to get out of the car and try to go talk to them. And so he gets out of the car, and then the guy tried to like talk to them. The driver was like, I'm just going to drive. So I'm just going to talk to the sheriff. And he's like, so either shoot me now or leave us alone. And they were just like, turn the car off and put your hands up. Oh, so finally, he decided to just drive. So we all got down on the floorboard, and he took off. And then they started firing at us. They started shooting us a bunch of times. And then they had a roadblock set up. And so he ran into a snowbank, and they were like riddling the car with bullets. And then they, like when we crashed, they stopped for a second. He got out of the car, and he had his hands in the air. He's like, and rest. He's like, just shoot me then. This is what you want, to shoot me. And they did. They shot him dead. They shot him like right there because he was just walking with his hands in the air, and I saw it. I swear to God, he was just walking with his hands in the air, and they shot him. And they shot him dead. And then after he was down on the ground, they shot him 3 more times. And then they bombarded our vehicle with bullets. Ryan got hit in the shoulder. We were laying there on the floorboard screaming, and they gassed us like 5 times, and they kept trying to shoot us, and their angle was bad, so I don't know, we were praying like so hard, and we were screaming like, stop, please stop, please stop, and they were just riddling us with bullets. They kept gassing us over and over, and we couldn't breathe because of the gas, and we were trying to find something white so that we could put a white flag out, and then I was trying to see, because Ryan knew he had got hit in the shoulder, so he was like, well, I don't think it's too bad, though. So so we were just trying to find a way to get out there, and then they, hold on one second. I'm waiting for them to call me back.
Listen, Victoria, I recorded your testimony.
Oh, okay.
All right, because if anything happens to you, I think it's really important to have that.
All right.
Okay, so let's just get this clear. Mr. Finnecum's hands hands were in the air when he was shot.
Yes.
Was he standing?
We saw him face up. I mean, his hands were still up after he was dead.
Okay, they shot him and he went down, then they shot him again on the ground?
Yeah, they shot him like at least 6 times.
The newspaper reports are just saying that 3 shots were fired, but that's not true.
No, are you kidding me? They shot at least 120 shots probably altogether.
Okay.
But they were shooting the cars, and like a lot.
What side of the windows were the windows blown out on, the left or the right side?
Left.
Left side, okay. And
they kept hitting the right. They kept hitting the right side of the car too, but they didn't blow. Like the windows didn't come out. Like they were hitting the metal instead of the glass.
Okay. And so, not one shot was fired by anybody in the car or by a Lavoie.
No one even touched their gun.
No one touched their gun.
No one pulled their gun out. No one touched the gun. We had no rifles. A couple of the guys had sidearms on, but no one touched them. In fact, they had their hands out the windows to show that they were not firing. They weren't nothing.
Okay, so
We showed no aggression at all.
When Ryan Bundy was shot, both his hands were out the window and his head was out the window?
No, at the time he was on the floor of the car because that was when they were shooting at our vehicle. We couldn't get out of the car or we would have been dead.
Right, okay. And so how many police vehicles or how many vehicles would you say were involved in this encounter? FBI vehicles, etc.?
I didn't count. I was really shooken up when they got out. But we all noted that there was, like, a ton of vehicles. There were, I don't know, maybe 40 altogether.
Okay.
There was tons. And there were people in the trees. Like, it was an ambush. It was a set-up ambush or something because there was, like, people in the trees, FBI snipers and people in the trees because we saw them. They're all pointing their, like, I had, like, 20 lasers on me when I was getting out of the car.
Okay. So Lloyd got out of the driver's seat and he
when he crashed into the snowbank, then he immediately got out of the car. He had his hands in the air. He's like, just shoot me then, because he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go down. He didn't want to. But he did not. He just had his hands in the air. He's like, are you just going to shoot me? And then they just shot him.
And how many shots would you say that were fired when they shot him the first time?
The first time that he was shot?
When they shot him, did you hear multiple rounds?
Yes, I did. He got hit by several people. Like, it was like simultaneous, and we were like, what? We couldn't believe it. It shocked us because he had his hands in the air. We couldn't believe that they were actually going to shoot him. And we were like, what? Is he dead? Is he dead? And then I was like, because we knew that he had gotten shot, we couldn't hear him, and I was like, then I screamed, I'm in him too, let me come out and help him, I just want to help him. And then they started firing at the car, the vehicle again, and then they wouldn't let us out. And, it was so scary.
About how long would you say they fired at the car before they finally stopped?
Somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes.
Victoria, we're going to be praying for you, okay? And
right.
I have this recorded because I fear for your life. I feel like if you were one of the few people, you're not under arrest, but you were a witness, a direct eyewitness to what happened. So I wanted to get this down, and I wanted to document this as well as I could. Who was driving so Lavoie was driving the car, and Ryan was in the front seat?
No, Ryan Payne was in the front seat, but during the incident, he got out. When they first stopped us, he stopped in the middle of the road and told them, we're going to talk to the sheriff, he said. And then when they fired the first shot, it was actually at that point, Ryan Payne had both his hands out the window and his head, and then they shot at him.
That was the first shot?
That was the first shot.
Okay, so... And
that's when they knew that's when we knew that they meant business, that they were serious. And then I'm talking to someone in Michigan that I live with. They're recording this just in case. So that was the first shot, and then he ended up getting out of the car because they stopped shooting. He got out of the car, and then after we started driving again, they shot. That's when they started shooting at us again. So, but we had lasers on us the whole time. They were ready to shoot.
Okay, so Ryan got out of the car. Did he ever get back in the car before he took off?
No, he was arrested, or he was taken into custody at least. I don't know if he was arrested, because all of us were taken into custody, and he was with us. Like, we all got transported together, and then they separated all of us.
And that's Ryan Payne you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, and where was Ryan Bundy?
He was in the back seat of the car beside me. I had fallen asleep on him. I had fallen asleep on him right when we got pulled over. I was asleep, and then I woke up when the whole thing started going down.
So
he was sitting to the left of me.
Okay, so you were in the middle?
Yes.
And then the other lady...
On my right.
Who was? Shauna Cox on your right, Ryan Bundy on your left. And you were headed to go see the sheriff?
We were going to this meeting that was going on, so all of us sheriffs were going to sing, and the sheriff was going to be there, and a bunch of ranchers. We were just going to try to talk and maybe do some negotiations, and we were going to sing. And so that was all, and then we were ambushed. I mean, it was known that we were going to go, so they probably just decided to choose that area maybe because it was really wooded and everything, and we didn't have any phone service. So.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to be up if you want to call me at any time during this, okay? Because I can't do much. I can pray for you guys, but I can also try to document as best as possible to make sure that the story is not, because right now the media is reporting that 3 shots were fired.
Oh, no, that's a total lie.
Okay.
Of course, the media is going to report that, but...
Right, well...
Are you kidding me? Have you seen the car? Have you seen the vehicle?
No.
It's completely covered with gunshots.
Well, no, they're not going to release that because they don't want
And he's probably got 6 holes in him himself.
Okay. Well, I'm just telling you. So, now let me ask you this. Do you want this story to get out?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop the recording and I'm gonna see how well it's turning out. I want to be able to determine if I can hear you clearly and determine, and I mean, I am willing to try to get this out there to any media outlet that I possibly can. Independent media, but I need to know, so is your family back at the refuge?
No, they're not. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Someone's calling me.
All right. Go ahead and answer.
Oh, I need to let you go.
Bye-bye. Call me back.
All right, bye.
And right there at the end, she says something about she thinks someone's following her. She has to go. So, hopefully she's not being targeted for what she knows. Apparently, Santilli, I've seen a video Next News Network put out. You'll have to go watch it. But it apparently shows Santilli showing up. There's a roadblock checkpoint. He gets out to talk, and they arrest him there. They get him out of the car by saying, yeah, we'll talk to you. And then cops surround the vehicle. Ask the occupants of the vehicle, if they had guns and all that, and then basically told them to leave. I'm trying to pull something up. If this one picture that I've come across that claims to be the SUV, which it is, same color that they were supposedly in, it is riddled with holes. I'm trying to get more information. Now, we might not agree with the militiamen, protesters, whatever you want to call them, or they call themselves. This reaction by government officials shows tyrannical measures. This wasn't them hurting someone. This was them making the federal government look bad. And that truly is what that was over. Don't make us look bad. We will retaliate. So if this eyewitness that was there in the vehicle, even if half of the story is true, this shows that the government is allowed to initiate violence against people and be immune, while the peaceful people are turned into criminals. Hypocrites. Now again, didn't agree with them continue to occupy. I think, this wasn't a fight that was worth fighting for them, definitely. But that also was their choice. They were nonviolent. This gentleman that was killed might have shown a little aggression after they've been shot at. Lasers pointed at him. Ambushed. According to that eyewitness, possible snipers in the trees. Being a little upset that maybe that was happening. Again, federal government talking about some peaceful resolution means that they want you to be peaceful while they torture you, enslave you, shoot at you, attempted murder. But in the end, we're going to have to wait for more information to come out and evidence to come out and see where that takes us. Okay. Want to get into a little bit of politics here. If I can get it. Maybe. Okay. I think it's coming up now. Okay. Looks like we're here. Sorry. If I don't close my browser every once in a while, I don't know. It keeps messing up on me here. This one is a reality check. TruthTheMedia.com. Reality check: Cruz flip-flopping positions on Snowden to please Rubio. Come on. Sorry, my browser browser just crashed again. I'll have to close it completely out and restart it here. Every time I try to bring it up. Let me try to bring it up through Ben Swan's YouTube account instead of Truth to Media. I might get lucky there. Okay. Now we should be good. Okay, here we go.
Well, Senator Ted Cruz is accused of flip-flopping on a number of issues: immigration, Syrian refugees, and the border. But what about his position on the nation's most famous whistleblower? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. It is now clear that Snowden is a traitor, and he should be tried for treason. Those words published by the New York Times from Senator Ted Cruz. Cruz made the statement only days ago after he was hammered by Senator Marco Rubio as being weak on national security.
I never believed Edward Snowden was a good public servant, the way Ted Cruz once said that he had done a public service for America.
And so, in response to the Rubio comments, Cruz said that Snowden is a traitor and should be tried for treason, a charge that until 1998 carried the death penalty and still today carries life imprisonment. But remember, Edward Snowden, now he is the former NSA contractor who revealed to the world the NSA spying program. That included every email, phone call, and text message made and sent in the United States. Snowden's revelations, they've had a massive impact on the way Americans view government spying. They've also led to filibusters by Senator Rand Paul over the USA Freedom Act and the Patriot Act. Okay, so Cruz, he thinks that Snowden is a traitor. Big deal, right? So do most Republican candidates. Well, what's interesting here is that in 2013, Senator Cruz wasn't so clear on his position. And when asked whether or not Snowden was a traitor, Cruz said this.
I think it depends on what the contours of the program are, and I don't think we should rush to judgment or jump to conclusions.
So technically all Cruz said there was to reserve judgment. But he also said more, telling the Blaze in 2013, quote, if it is the case that the federal government is seizing millions of personal records about law-abiding citizens, and if it is the case that there are minimal restrictions on accessing or reviewing those records, then I think Mr. Snowden has done a considerable public service by bringing it to light. Well, based on that statement, then yes, Snowden did a public service because the federal government, they were, and they still are, seizing millions of personal records about law-abiding citizens. Not only that, but federal courts would go on to rule, even as recently as 2015, that what the NSA was doing was illegal. And in response to that ruling in 2015, Cruz said this, quote, the court's ruling today confirms what the American public already knew. The National Security Agency's data collection program went too far in collecting the phone records of Americans. Well, yes. And the reason the American public already knew that was because of Edward Snowden. The truth? Since Snowden's revelations in 2013, one court after another has upheld that what he revealed was criminal on the part of the NSA. As for Cruz, well, he's obviously just positioning himself for the sake of politics. But the bottom line here, in 2013, Ted Cruz thought Edward Snowden did a brave thing. Today, he thinks he's a traitor. All because Marco Rubio calls him out? And tough to know what Cruz really believes at all on this issue. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
Reality Check, Ben Swan, truthandmedia.com. Check him out. Now, I find a lot of problems with Ted Cruz. He does flip-flop. But everybody seems to flip-flop a little bit. People's minds change. They might learn something, change of heart. So that does happen. And it's not always a bad thing. If people come to understand something better and change their mind. But does Edward Snowden, yeah, he's doing it for political gain, not out of intelligence, then it's hard to really gauge who he is, where he is. That being said, we're going to try this one more time because there was an article on truthandmedia.com that I wanted to cover. I don't know if anybody's heard, but Rand Paul is supposed to be in the next GOP debate. And this also showed up breaking this morning. Rand Paul presidential campaign office burglarized, computers stolen. Senator Rand Paul's presidential campaign office in New Hampshire was broken into sometime in the past 24 hours, robbed of computers with databases and campaign files, according to social media posts from one of the candidate's top advisors. Michael Blundo, serving as National Senior Advisor for Senator Paul's presidential campaign, posted to his Facebook and Twitter accounts this morning with the following update. Quote, getting ready to go to Iowa today for the final caucus push, and now I'm dealing with our New Hampshire for Rand Paul office being broken into. I needed more stress this morning, thanks. Update, 2:30 p.m. Brandon Ross, the local attorney and volunteer with the Paul campaign, told Truth and Media that other businesses in the same building reported attempted burglaries earlier in the week. Matt Chisholm, Paul's New Hampshire communications director, claimed that the items stolen included 4 iPads, 2 laptop computers, 2 cell phones, and some other small electronic devices, including cameras and headphones. That out of Truth and Media. But, hey, Rand Paul will be in the debate. He's not his father, but I'm telling you, I think if you're even going to play the vote game when it comes to this presidential election, I think that he would be the only even close choice, and you are picking the least worst person. I think he has flaws. Many people go, he's playing the game. Well, if he's playing the game's stabbing him in the back. Rand Paul did not show up to the second tier debates for the last GOP debates. And the media kind of ignored it to a point, even though he was able to go around and get media attention while he was not going to be on the second tier debate stage. As soon as he's back in the debates, Donald Trump plays the Megyn Kelly card, and all attention's on Donald Trump not going to the presidential campaign debates. Well, who cares? I again think he is a fascist type person. I think that or the elites don't fear Donald Trump for the reasons you think. They fear him because he wants control. They don't want him to get control. Same end game. Well, I wouldn't even say same end game. I think Trump will try to be a nationalist, but a fascist at the same time. Shut down the internet, free speech isn't important. You know, this is not someone that's going to make our country stronger in the long run. He might build us up only to pee off the rest of the world for them to turn on us. Many have pointed to Hitler, and I don't disagree fully with that. I think that there's a lot that him and Hitler have in common when they speak. Not how they speak or exact language, but there's a lot of rhetoric. And that's what the rhetoric is, that fascist type nationalist rhetoric. And he never really gets to the right issues like, oh, the Federal Reserve, things like that. You get Ted Cruz to say it, but then he don't show up for the vote. And I think if we get a Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, any of that, we're done. If we get Mark Rubio, we're done. Ted Cruz, I still think that we're on the losing end of that. Third party, but that's not happening. But I think it's a good thing that Rand Paul is now back on the main stage where maybe he can continue to push some actual messages other than rhetoric. But we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Give me a second here. Okay, I'm having an issue again. Browser just crashed. Let me get this back up as soon as possible here. I want to play here the best and worst moments of the South Carolina GOP debate, if I can. Okay, there it goes. Okay, here we go.
Most people know exactly what New York values are.
I am from New York.
Well, you're from New York, so you might not. But I promise you, in the state of South Carolina, they do.
Another day, another GOP primary debate with Donald Trump center stage. So how'd the candidates fare without self-described libertarianish Senator Rand Paul in the mix anymore? Pull up a seat and take a load off, because we've watched hours of this stuff to distill down for you only the best and worst moments of the South Carolina GOP debate.
Listen, there's a real difference between Marco's tax plan and mine. Mine gives every American a simple, flat tax of 10%. Marco's top tax rate is 35%.
Americans hate the tax system, and most mistrust the IRS, so it was refreshing to hear an actual substantive discussion of tax reform from many of the candidates.
I'm not going to have something that Ted described in his tax plan. It's called a value-added tax. It is a tax you find in many companies in Europe, where basically businesses now will have to pay a tax both on the money they make, but they also have to pay taxes on the money they pay their employees. And that's why they have it in Europe, because it's a way to blindfold the people.
Even Ben Carson shook himself awake long enough to point out that taxation tends to hit the poor far harder than it does the wealthy.
Every regulation is a tax. It's on goods and services. And it's the most regressive tax that there is. You know, when you go into the store and buy a box of laundry detergent and the price has gone up, 50 cents because of regulations, a poor person notices that, a rich person does not.
I would certainly start taxing goods that come in from China. Who the hell has to lose $505 billion a year?
I'm sorry, sir. Donald Trump did what Donald Trump does best, bluster against China.
I'm a free trader. I believe it. But we have to be smart, and we have to use smart people to negotiate.
But some candidates on stage pushed back and pointed out that tariffs don't just punish our supposed enemies, they punish American consumers.
I think we need to be very careful with tariffs, and here's why. China doesn't pay the tariff. The buyer pays the tariff. If you send a tie or a shirt made in China into the United States and an American goes to buy it at the store and there's a tariff on it, it gets passed on in the price to the consumer.
There'll be retaliation.
Yeah.
You think that the Chinese, if they had a 45% tariff imposed on all their imports, wouldn't retaliate and start buying Airbus? Of course they would.
The military is not ready either. We need to rebuild our military, and this president has let it diminish to a point where tin pot dictators like the mullahs in Iran are taking our Navy ships.
Republicans always talk a big game about cutting spending, except when it comes to the military, and this debate was no different.
If I'm president of the United States and Congress tries to cut the military, I will veto that in a millisecond.
Remember, this is despite the fact that the U.S. spends more on its military than the next 7 nations combined.
I will gladly accept the mantle of anger.
There's nothing Donald Trump can say to shock anyone anymore, but doubling down on his all-out Muslim ban was a particularly shameful moment in this debate.
Is there anything you've heard that makes you want to rethink this position?
No. And I have many great Muslim friends. And some of them, I will say not all, have called me and said, Donald, thank you very much. You're exposing an unbelievable problem.
We should put the NSA in charge of the civilian side of this as well. That expertise needs to spread all across the government.
Without Rand Paul's dissenting voice in the mix, the national security portion of this debate quickly devolved into an NSA love fest.
What we want to do is to control this. We also want to dominate this from a commercial side.
Edward Snowden is a traitor, and if I am president and we get our hands on him, he is standing trial for treason.
This president doesn't enforce the marijuana laws in this country because he doesn't agree with them. And he allows states to go ahead and do whatever they want.
Beyond the usual war on fill in the blank.
We have a war on virtually everything, race wars, gender wars, income wars, religious wars, age wars. Every war you can imagine, we have people at each other's throats.
This debate saw an especially chill wind blowing through the battle planes of local law enforcement.
There's a chill wind blowing through law enforcement in this country.
The police are the most mistreated people in this country. I will tell you that. The most mistreated
Despite FBI statistics showing the police have never been safer in history. Agree? Disagree? Just don't care? Let us know in the comments.
Reason.tv or Reason TV on YouTube, Reason.com. Check them out. Subscribe. Try not to drop everything off my desk here. Now, again, Rand Paul will be in this next debate. That dissenting voice will be there. But why wasn't there? You know, Ted Cruz is always put up as this Tea Partyist. You know, you got Glenn Beck out here supporting Ted Cruz. It's one of those things that dissenting voice should have been there during that debate. It wasn't there. He's not a Tea Partyist. Yes, he might have done a few things to support, the Constitution when it, he was working and fighting for it in Texas. But he has a lot of issues still. And I think Rand Paul has less. Does he have his own? Oh, hell yeah. But if you're going to claim Ted Cruz to be this, freedom lover, he should have been able to step up on that debate, and he didn't. So, again, another reason why I'm not, a Ted Cruz supporter. It's not going to happen. Okay, see where we are. Yep, we got about 13 minutes left. I have one last article to cover. And this, how states got away with sterilizing 60,000 Americans. On the morning of October 19th, 1927, the Commonwealth of Virginia sterilized Carrie Buck. Dr. John Bell, whose name would forever be linked with Carrie's in the Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell, cut her open and removed a section from each of her fallopian tubes. In his note, Dr. Bell noted that this was the first case operated on under the sterilization law. Carrie Buck was an average, unassuming girl who grew up around Charlottesville. She wasn't very smart, but she wasn't dumb either. She didn't come from the best circumstances, but she did the best with what she had. Pictures show a plain young woman with short, dark hair, bobbed in the fashion of the time. In one photo taken by Arthur Estabrook, an expert in eugenics whose testimony would help seal her fate, Carrie sits on a bench with her mother, Emma, at the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and feeble-minded, where both were institutionalized. Estabrook's photo of Carrie and Emma was taken on November 17, 1924, the day before Carrie's trial began. Estabrook had come to visit Carrie and Emma at the urging of Dr. Albert Priddy, the superintendent of the Virginia colony. Priddy was building a case against Carrie, a case for her forced sterilization, and he needed a purported expert in the science of inferior genetics, aka eugenics, to testify that Carrie, her mother, and Carrie's 6-month-old daughter, Vivian, were all congenitally and irredeemably feeble-minded. In a different time, Easterbrook, with his neatly... Sorry, let me fix this here. With his neatly parted hair and defined features, could have become a well-known character actor, a face in all those movies. But Estabrook was an employee at the Eugenics Record Office in Cold Springs Harbor, New York, and he was more than prepared to testify to the sorry, I'm trying to get this thing to scroll. To the inferiority of Carrie and her bloodline. Most of his life had been devoted to diagnosing and describing defective bloodlines that, in his view, held humanity back. At the urging of Aubrey Strode, the lawyer for Dr. Priddy and the Virginia State Colony, Estabrook rushed down to Lynchburg to testify against Carrie. Strode believed that the testimony of a true expert in eugenics would be crucial to developing an unassailable legal record proving that Carrie, Emma, and Vivian all carried defective genes, and therefore that the state had both the authority and the right to sterilize Carrie to prevent any further feeble-minded offspring. He needed such expert testimony if the appellate courts and possibly even the U.S. Supreme Court were going to uphold Carrie's sterilization and thus ratify not only Dr. Priddy's plans for the mass sterilization of genetic defectives, but also the plans of thousands of similar eugenics around the country. Eugenics was Estabrook's life work, so of course he came as quickly as he could. It took Estabrook a short time to be convinced that Carrie and Emma were inherently feeble-minded. In the picture, he took Carrie and Emma stared distantly at Estabrook's camera, seemingly not too happy to have been interrogated by someone who presumed they were imbeciles from the outset. We know Carrie's story because her case eventually made it to the Supreme Court, but the Commonwealth of Virginia in the 1920s, Carrie was just another congenitally feeble-minded woman who was the parlance of the times, had a tainted germ plasm that would create generations of socially inadequate defectives if she were allowed to procreate freely. Carrie is the most famous of at least 60,000 Americans who were forcibly sterilized in order to cleanse the race of undesirable genes. The United States forcibly sterilized people through the 1970s. Many victims are still living. Virginia has apologized for its sterilization program, and like North Carolina before it, voted to compensate still living victims. Yet, even today, many law professors seem to want to sweep Buck versus Bell under the rug. They rather talk about Lochner versus New York when the court overturned New York's maximum work hour law as a violation of the liberty of contract. And Buck versus Bell, judges are still said to be Lochnerizing when they are accused of legislating from the bench, but we don't have a similar objective form of Buck. Furthermore, because Lochner was overturned during the New Deal, its residual impact on our laws have been minimal. Buck versus Bell legacy far bloodier. Even those familiar with the general facts of Buck versus Bell, Carrie's story is worse than they realize. We now know that she was unknowingly part of a plot to validate Virginia's forced sterilization law passed in 1924 to rid society of the idiocracy, imbecile feeble-mindedness, or epilepsy. Even Carrie's lawyer was part of the plot, offering essentially no defense to the groundless claim that she was congenitally stupid. The simple but far from stupid girl from Charlottesville found herself at the center of what amounted to a conspiracy against her own reproductive future. The judges and justices who ratified Carrie's sterilization dedicated their responsibility to protect the weakest among us from machinations in the powerful and prejudice of the majority. Carrie needed protection from pseudoscience and groundless assertions, but all she got was unquestioned seal of approval. You can read the rest of that out at Foundation for Economic Education. And I want to bring up that story for our last story just to point out, when you call for government, whether it be your local, your national, or some type of world government to come save you, remember what happens when you give government the power and take that responsibility out of your own hands. The most evil people in society see that as a power structure. They see that as a way to enslave you and control you and benefit off of you. And that's where we're going in society right now. We've lost the individual freedom in society because we're taught we have to live for everyone else but ourselves. And we forget that to help others out, you must first help yourself. And we're being told that's wrong. Don't help yourself because you must help others, leaving us a nation of weak people because we are not self-reliant. If you can't rely on yourself, how can other people rely on you? Society is degrading, and we have to reverse it while we have a chance. I want everybody to go to ucy.tv and click that support tab at the top, support UCY, and, chip in a few bucks here and there, and that helps keep this platform open for me and the other hosts here on ucy.tv to spread the message of freedom and get the information that mainstream media is not covering. You can also scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there is an Amazon tab. When you click that tab, you get to go to Amazon, shop through Amazon, get the same great deal, same great shipping rate, and you're also helping ucy.tv out at the same time. Great way to shop when you're shopping online is through Amazon. And again, click that link on the bottom of ucy.tv. Just look for that Amazon button. And also, I'm a big prepping type guy, and I'm also a person that talks about metals and Bitcoin. And I think it's very important that people diversify their savings in metals, Bitcoin, and property, food, everything that you need to be self-sufficient, and never put all your eggs in one basket. But if you do want to catch a great deal on silver and gold. Go to antityrannynews.com/metal, and that'll take you straight to Moggy Metals, my choice for gold and silver. Check them out. Really, really great deals going on right now. And when you go through that link, antityrannynews.com/metal, you're also helping this broadcast out. And it's very important.